Yeah, let's continue off with where we left off with True Detective, episode 6, Haunted Houses, right? Isn't that the name of the episode, I believe?
Haunted Houses. Yep, you are right.
All
Episode
right.
6 of True Detective Season 1.
I rewatched it this afternoon. Great episode. A lot to unpack with it. Different angles here. We've got stuff going on with Marty again and his personal life. Rust continuing the full-blown conspiracy investigation single-handedly, and the mental anguish that he finds himself under in the professional environment, kicking him down essentially and calling him crazy. His trials, Maggie's trials throughout the episode with her discoveries about Marty again. There's just a lot going on. Where does it stand for you in terms of overall, I guess, episodes throughout the series? Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I enjoy it. It's one of my favorites. Especially the start, it shows Rust visiting one of the girls that they rescue from the Ledoux compound. Kelly, I believe her name is. And it's just a very eerie way to start. I mean, whoever that actress is who plays the girl in the mental hospital is an unbelievable actress. That scene gets me every time because it's just the trauma, that she endured and, doesn't take much for her to be triggered, for her PTSD to be triggered with Russ just asking a few questions. She talks a little bit about the giant with the scars and she just has a complete meltdown and it's really unsettling. It's very sad, unbelievable scene though.
Hmm.
And, it just really sets the tone. It's obviously a dark show. We spent time talking about that last week. It's scary, for sure, but like that scene really starts the true ending to the show. And, it gets very dark. It just really sets the tone for a true climax
Sure.
of the season. And it's an unsettling scene. What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. At this point, it's full on dark, it just gets darker and darker. That scene you're talking about really confirms to Rust again, like, oh wow, we kind of forgot about the man with the scars, and
Right.
last episode he interviews Guy Francis in the prison cell. He gets whacked, offs himself under,
Orders, if you will.
orders, or offs himself under mysterious circumstances, to say the least. He knows he's onto something. I want to go back even a little bit further here to start the episode. Is It really goes to show how much Rust despises the people around him at this point, because first he speaks to the Reverend Thoreau.
Yeah, Theriot,
Theriot, yep,
who's
Reverend
now an
Theriot.
alcoholic.
He's become an alcoholic, and that's his first real confirmation that the Tuttle Ministries, those schools that the Tuttle Ministries set up, were essentially a hotbed breeding ground for the cult. That Reverend, admits to Russ that he left the ministries and confronted his superiors when he essentially found, the pictures that he explains to Rust about. The book that he tells Rust that he found them in, according to Google, isn't even a real book.
Hmm.
You should read some of the Reddit threads about that book. Legend, I guess, about it. Let me look this up really quick. Tells him it's like a 12th century book that he finds all these pictures in when he's cleaning the office. And the book is called The Letters of Telios de Lorca. Google says it doesn't exist. It was made up for the purpose of this show, which I don't find to be completely accurate. Why would they make up a name of a book and explain in such detail what that book was where he found these pictures? Okay. If you do some research about it, there's a pretty interesting Reddit thread about this other legendary book that, there's a copy of it in a Harvard library. There's somewhere else, and it's like legends of somebody who held on to this book, their body being attacked by an invisible monster, with witnesses seeing this take place,
Hmm.
and like this person's body being devoured or something. Pretty weird. And it's a Reddit thread. But again, it's like as with this entire show, the fact that that Reverend tells Rust Cole what book he found these pictures in, again, every line means something in this show, as we've come to find out. And like last week, the theory about Maggie's dad potentially, on according to Reddit anyway, being a participant in this cult. I just thought that was interesting that they make note of what this book was. I'm rambling, but He admits to Russ that's why he left. He didn't like it. The people he reported it to almost try to spin it around on him, like, oh, are you trying to confess something yourself?
Yeah, right.
Which is disgusting. And,
Right.
we find out that's why essentially he stopped the ministry.
So that's two scenes that, really hit hard. They're very sad, just spoke a little bit about Rust visiting Kelly, the rescue from Ledoux's compound, and then, revisiting the Reverend because we were introduced to him, I believe, episode three, the beginning of episode three. I could
I
be
think
wrong
it's
about
two,
that.
actually. I think
Is
it's
it
two.
two? But he was just such an energetic, passionate,
Pastor,
reverend,
minister, yeah.
minister who truly believed in, what he was preaching, the cause, the whole lifestyle, like he backed it. And it's really sad seeing where his character has gone, some years later, ultimately stemmed from this event, finding those pictures and bringing them to his superiors and being met with that. Obviously, there was a few other things like that he mentions, like the tent getting vandalized, but this incident with finding the pictures really was the explanation point. That was really his breaking point. And it's really sad to see because this show does such an amazing job just storytelling. I mean, this storyline starts all the way back in the 90s, all the way
Sure.
up to present day. So now here we have a sub character that we see, and just seeing his end point, through all of this. And just
And
another person that this case ultimately affected. He may have not have been as, in deep to the case as, other people we've been introduced to, but he's pretty involved, and
he is. He is.
it's very sad to see, where the Reverend ends up. Obviously an alcoholic. As Cole says, you always hit the bottle this early in the day, Reverend, so I always thought about that. It was definitely sad, in my opinion, to see where the Reverend ended up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the last line he has in the entire series is, he's talking to Rust and he says, all my life, I've always wanted to be close to God. And the closest to God I ever feel is when there's just silence.
Mm.
And then the cut scene.
Unbelievable
Maybe
actor. He's a great actor,
great
man.
actor, great script, great writing. But it is important to note that the person he mentions, Austin Farrar,
Hmm.
an unseen, we don't meet Austin Farrar throughout the entire series, but that's his office is being cleaned when he finds those pictures, the Reverend. So that's important, that Rust has that discussion. He meets with the little girl that he rescued with Marty back in the day. But then we get another random scene here. At first glance, you're like, this has nothing to do with the story, but I think it perfectly illustrates the mind frame that or the frame of mind that Rust is in at this point. Hearing about all these children victims and everything from the Reverend to Thoreau that he just interviewed. And he knows there's conspiracy going on at this point. The kids that he rescued, the breakdown he witnesses of the little girl who he interviews again. And it cuts to him getting an admission of guilt of a woman who's had three children at this point, all of them pass away of SIDS, apparently, sudden
Hmm.
infant death syndrome. And he gets her to admit to it that she's a psychopath and has, done these horrible things to her babies. And such a powerful line. I feel like he tells her after she signs the admission of guilt, he's the only one in the room with her, and he says, prison is very hard on people who hurt children. If
Hmm.
you get the opportunity, you should kill yourself. I just think, like, it throws her into a panic and she's like, what? Like, what did you just say to me? And she starts crying and he just walks out. He's like, fuck you.
Hmm.
And that just perfectly illustrates how he feels about, you know, the people he's after. It's like, I'm so tired of, my daughter was taken away from me in this world.
Hmm.
And I'm dealing with all these people who do nothing but sick things to children.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't give a fuck about their feelings. I'm going to make them feel like absolute shit. And I won't stop until I get to the bottom of it, essentially. I
Now,
think
quick,
that's just genius.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Now, I'm sorry, quick question because I also wanted to talk about this and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but you and I share a similar belief that we don't necessarily believe the two detectives in present day interviewing are
In on
part
it.
of these big people, but
Right.
we have, expressed, oh, maybe their higher ups are pointing them in this direction.
Sure.
I found this so interesting that he tells this this mother, go do that after he gets the admittance he's looking for, especially after the last episode, what happened to Guy Francis. Obviously, he had a very similar confession to Russ Cole, and then, laid out the bomb about the Yellow King, and then that night he ended up doing what he did. I found it so interesting an episode later that Cole now is telling someone to do that. My mind took me to not because he's a bad guy. I agree with what you're saying. He's just kind of over this type of behavior. He's over this BS. But do you also think that maybe they caught him on the mic saying that? And if they have that on the mic saying that to this new victim, maybe they used that in their current theory that he is the bad guy. Well,
That's a
he
great
just
theory.
he
Yeah.
just told this woman to go do X, Y, and Z. Well, just a little bit ago, this whole situation with Guy Francis, took place. He did that, and Cole was the last person to have him in the room. So I agree with you 100%. The writers don't put anything in here randomly. They have a reason for each and every single thing they do and include in the show. I just found that, like, isn't that too much of a coincidence that in two episodes in a row you have the admission and now one person follows through with that X, Y, and Z, and now we have another person who
It does
Cole
look
is
like a
saying.
right.
So does that maybe point the detectives in Cole's direction too?
The
Well,
only
wow, we
thing
have this
is
guy on a hot mic saying go do that. You know what I
they
mean?
don't, that's a great point and great theory, but they don't mention that to Marty. You
Gotcha.
would think they would be like, we have him on a hot mic telling this lady, jail is very hard on people who hurt children. You should off yourself. You would think if that was part of it, like that would have been a great thing to add to it that would have supported their theory that Rust is actually
Right.
behind it all, but they don't mention it, and you would think that they would have if they had
True.
him on a hot mic saying that. But I like
True.
the theory. I think that that's you're right. Every line means something. Every scene means something. To
Yep.
me, though, I just feel like it was more so just showing Rust's state of mind when dealing with criminals who are hurting children when his child was taken away from him. Like he feels like life is unfair and not important. He's pretty nihilistic. And you have all these people that he's investigating or coming across that have hurt children. And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to make your life a living hell and
Yeah.
scare you into doing something that he tells her to do. So it just either way, again, inside the mind of Rust Cole. So that leads, he starts bringing this up to, we start seeing some friction between him and Marty at this point, telling him to type up that admission of guilt. It's 40 pages, man. What, my time's not good enough? Or
Just
my
got the
time
fucking
isn't
report.
shit to yours? And he's just like,
I think that he knows now again Marty's back in his old ways.
yeah, yeah,
Marty's drinking again, and Marty now starts a relationship with, interestingly enough, the girl from episode
two,
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 excuse me.
yeah.
Beth, her name is, and he obviously begins a love affair with her, and I think Cole knows that, and I think that's also why he's like, "Fuck you, fuck this, type the report. I'm over your bullshit too."
Hmm.
And I love hearing you talk about just his mindset where he's just over people's BS because after he visits Kelly, the survivor of the Ledoux compound, we're introduced to the new major, Leroy Salter,
Yeah. Who's an
played
absolute prick.
Yep, played by Paul Ben Victor, who also just destroys his role. He does such a great job. And we spend so much time in here talking about patterns in this show. He keeps up the pattern of just being a complete asshole to Cole, really for no reason. I could understand that he did upset, the survivor here, but Salter just seems like a complete jerk all around anyway. He's on Cole for following through with these leads, and he puts a warning on him.
Since, at this point he presents his case, there's a lot of shit going on here. There's still people disappearing and dying up and down the coast. And he starts presenting who he thinks is behind it. Billy Lee
Hmm.
Tuttle, the Tuttle Ministries and the schools, the startup schools. And he's pretty much told, keep that shit to yourself. Like, don't come in here with that shit. Marty completely chastises him in front of the new chief. Is like, this is the first time I'm hearing about this, boss. Totally is, not trying to involve himself in conspiracy talk and anything regarding this investigation. He's completely in his own little world as usual. So we start to see that friction really take off between Marty and Rust again. That leads to one of the best scenes in the entire episode, in my opinion. We have Rust meeting with Kelly, the little girl victim who's in the group home, the interrogation with the mom who, has three deceased children, which is a pretty intense scene. We have him meet the old Reverend Thoreau and get that news from him about why he left the ministries and kind of confirms his suspicions. Next, we get him going straight to the source and interviewing Billy Lee Tuttle. Great scene. He walks into the room and I love the set design choices. He's
Yeah.
got this big
Lit
uh
up cross.
neon lit up cross on his wall, just looks the part so well. Clean, polished answers, for Rust.
Pinky ring.
Pinky ring, you just smell his bullshit though. And right off the get-go, he walks in and it's like confrontational, subtle confrontational back and forth between Tuttle and Rust. Rust kind of breadcrumbs him a little bit to see what Tuttle will give him. Sure enough, he just kind of says enough to raise Rust's eyebrows, and he knows he's where he needs to be. Speaking about Austin Farrar and what happened to him, and Tuttle plays it off like, yeah, we found out he was embezzling money,
Mm,
in the ministry's name, and then we had to let him go, and it was a shame. What happened to him? And then he knows that Rust is onto him, so he starts throwing shade back. Like, then again, it's hard to trust someone who can't trust themselves with a beer, right?
hmm.
Knowing, he knows everything about Rust at this point, and Rust knows what he's saying. He just kind of looks back at him like, huh, you sly son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And again, just like the writing, the exchange between them, Russ knows he's, on the right path, sniffing out answers. And Tuttle is like, when he gets nervous, he brings in his little call bell boy or whatever and is like, will you show the detective to our old files? And
And Cole
Rust is,
shuts that down, which I love.
I do too. He's like,
Like, I'll
another
be back
time.
for that.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
be back for that.
Yeah. And then I love how he just says to Russ too as he's walking, the doors are closing, final shot, and he's like, you'll be in my thoughts, detective. You would think a
Absolutely.
minister would be like, you'll be in my thoughts and prayers, like
Right.
you think of, thoughts and prayers coming from a preacher or something, but
You're
Rust
right.
only gets the you'll be in my thoughts, which is just very ominous sounding, again, great writing.
Yep.
And Rust is right. It's so obvious at this point, but that leads us to Rust being suspended for his work. And not only
Yep.
is the new chief, badge and gun,
Yep.
I fucking told you, badge and gun. Captain Speece is back in the office at this point.
Yep.
And, we were introduced to Speece when this investigation kicked off in 1995, escorting Billy Lee Tuttle around the office. And now here we see him again. The only other time in the series is when he's like helping getting Cole suspended from his work for doing this investigation on Tuttle. So it's to me, it's as obvious as ever. Cole gets suspended for a month without pay. Marty's sitting in there watching it happen and doesn't do shit to stop it other than, say, that seems excessive. But Russ knows that he's right at this point. And
And that's what he says. That's what he says. He says, if he called you up to bitch, then I am on fucking something. So
exactly,
even
yeah,
though he was very confident, in the work he was putting in and the leads he was pursuing on his own, even though like he knew like that was all the confirmation he needed, if he needed any at all, that
right,
okay, if he's calling you up to bitch after that conversation, not like he went in there accusing anybody of anything, he's just simply asking some questions. And now you have your two superiors having him, in his office, bitching him out, suspending him. It's like, yeah, like that's it. Like I cracked it right here, and now that was all I needed to know that this is it. I'm
exactly,
right.
exactly, yep. So he's at home drinking, whatnot. Maggie finds out about Marty's second affair, and we know where this leads. In order to get back at Marty once and for all and prove that the marriage is over, she goes to Rust. They do what they do. Rust is in his drunken state, and she admits it to Marty.
Well, I got a question for you.
Sure.
Marty obviously loses his shit. We know what it leads to. We'll dive more into that as that scene comes. But do you think he would have been as pissed if it was just some random person? I don't know what it is with
Yeah,
him
I
and
agree. I
I
agree
feel like the fact that
completely.
it was Cole is really what led him to, snapping the way he did. There's something about Cole that, they there was always that friction. They always really didn't see eye to eye, especially about like core beliefs, core values. So the fact that it was Cole that Maggie ended up pursuing, I think
Oh well,
that's
Maggie
why he
Maggie knows
was,
exactly what to say to get under his
yeah,
skin, you know,
yeah,
like
absolutely. Yeah.
best I've had since before the girls were born. Like,
Yeah.
and when she first admits to it to him, he kind of just does a long sigh, like, okay, that's fair.
Yeah, exactly.
And
And
it's
then when
not
it
until
was,
she's
it's
like,
somebody
you
he's
know him
like, I'm
well,
sorry. Who? Fucking tell me,
Rust.
Yeah.
And then he's like,
I truly believe if she would have followed through with like that guy at the bar and she was like, yeah, some random at the bar, he would have been like, all right, we're even. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
but the fact that it was Cole, I think that's
yeah,
really what led, to,
for sure. Absolutely right.
his outburst that we
Um,
see.
They get into the infamous brawl in the parking lot at work. Russ takes them, like he clearly holds back on Marty a little bit and
Hmm.
takes his dues. It cuts to the scene in the where they're in the office talking to their boss and Rust quits. It's like I quit. The boss is like, "You serious?" He's like, "Yeah, fuck this. Fuck this world. I'm done." And it's just such a boss way to quit your job.
Yeah,
I
for
love it.
sure.
Like Marty kind of looks at him like with like disappointment and sadness that Rust is actually quitting and leaving. Like he kind of looks
Hmm.
on his face like, "Oh wow, like our best detective is quitting."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he kind of has a face of regret and sadness when Rust announces that.
Yeah, well, it's fucking annoying because the major, like, are you serious? It's like, well, yeah. Like, why the fuck wouldn't he? Everybody shits on him. Everybody disrespects him. Like, he's the only one really
Who does a
putting in the
job
work
there at all.
100%, of the
Yeah.
time. He's like that committed to his work. You have Marty doing all this shit. Now Marty initiated that fight. Cole didn't want to fight at all. And like you said, he was even holding back on him. It's like, why wouldn't he quit when he does? Marty looks all sad. Salter's like, you serious? It's like, yeah, fuck. Drop
Mm.
anybody in Cole's position. I would hope they did. Like, fuck all you guys. I'm out.
Yeah, he just complete boss move the way he quits. He wasn't allowed to investigate the way he wanted to investigate anyway. Goes out on his own terms. He's just reached his limit. That's a wrap. That's pretty much how the episode ends with Marty defending Rust to the two detectives in present day time, saying, don't call me again. I'm not going to help you. And then Rust pulling Marty over and, first time they're seeing each other in what, a decade, agreeing to go for a beer together.
You talk about Cole quitting his job, boss move. You know who else boss move is Maggie in her testimony with the two
Yeah, she
detectives.
is. Yeah.
I love that scene. She totally runs it, makes a statement along the lines of like, trust me, I have experience talking to men, who X, Y, and Z. When I think they're smarter than they are, I think they're really controlling the conversation. Like she holds it down and uses her past experience to really, not allow these two to come in disrespecting her or Cole or Marty. I love how she has Cole's back through her testimony, doesn't throw him under the bus. She's not even honest about, what had happened with her and Cole, or she's not even really honest about the fact she knows about Cole and Marty falling out and not even speaking anymore.
Right.
So,
Right.
she just really holds it down that entire scene, that entire testimony. I always loved that.
You're so right. I love that about all three of them in the present day time interviews being conducted. Doesn't matter what they've all been through together, they all still defend each other in
Yeah.
in present day times to the core. Their stories always align. They don't throw each other under the bus. They don't really talk shit per se.
Hmm.
And I just think that that's such an important detail because only they know what the three of them went through together and as
Hmm.
individuals. And they're sure as hell not going to be interrogated by a couple of young detectives in modern day times, or be scrutinized or what have you. I just think that that's so important to notice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always enjoyed Maggie's character. She definitely got shit end of the stick. She's went through a lot. Then again, she's not perfect either doing what she did with Cole, but at the end of the day, start to finish, I really enjoy her character. She's a strong woman. She's a good person, and she definitely has the backs of those people she cares about. So,
Yeah, definitely.
but yeah, that's a wrap for this episode, and it leads quite the suspense, for the next one, saying, why don't you buy me a beer? Why don't I'll buy you a beer.
Buy
Then
you a
he
beer?
walks back and then he looks at Marty's car. He's like, why don't you buy me one actually? And there's been such a great job storytelling up to this point, up to the tail end of the show. And it's like now here we are. Flashbacks are pretty much out the way. We are here modern day.
Wh-
Rust and Marty about to sit down and just what's next. So
Why
they
do you
do it.
think he says that to Marty? Why do you think at first it's buy you a beer and
Oh,
then
I think
walks
it's
away?
because he sees that, Cole's bartending at a dive bar, and Marty, even though he's not a detective no more, he's a very I would say he's more financially successful than Cole at this point. So I think he pulls him over. He's like, "Let me buy you a beer." Marty's like, "All right." And then he like really stops and looks at Marty's car because Cole is still driving his fucking truck from the 90s. And he goes, "No, you know what? Fuck that. You're
Yeah.
gonna buy me a drink." I think that's my opinion. What do
I
you
think
think?
that's a good point because, the camera shows Russ driving behind Marty with his broken taillight, the
Broken
same
taillight
same
still, yeah.
broken taillight from the fight that they got into 10 years earlier, if not more. I also think though there's more meaning to it. He shows up to the truck, walks up to him, is like, "Hey Marty, it's been a long time." Marty's cordial enough. The way he says it, kind of with a cockiness to him, I think
Hmm.
it's because he's about to present the evidence that shows he was right all along to
Hmm.
Marty, his partner, who should have believed him, who he felt so disrespected. Earlier in the episode, he looks at Marty when he's like, "You got some fucking nerve not
Yeah.
defending me."
Yep.
Now we're gonna come to find out that Rust has all the information, all the evidence. He presents it all. We'll get into this next week, but he's saying, "No, actually, you're gonna buy me a beer because you're gonna be thanking me and apologizing for how wrong you were and for
Hmm.
how shitty you were to me about my theories that all turn out to be true." So I think he's like, "No, actually, you're just gonna buy me a beer because you
I
owe me
like
big
that.
time." You know
I
what I
like
mean?
I do know what you mean. I like that a lot. It makes more sense. And Cole has always kind of had that in your face, passive aggressive, like
Oh yeah,
gotcha too.
yeah,
And he lets it be
yeah,
known. He doesn't
yeah.
hold on to that shit. Like if he knows he's right, he'll flaunt that shit.
He could have just been pushing his buttons too, because yeah, he
Yeah.
always likes to get the last say in with his snarkiness and his one-liners. So maybe he did just throw that at Marty just to be a pain in the dick, like, "Oh, nothing's changed."
Yep.
But yeah, great
And
episode. Great
mhm.
ending of episode 6 leads into 7 and 8. We're getting there to the finale. Looking forward to breaking that one down. But yeah, that's pretty much a wrap for this week.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Looking forward to episode 7 after you've gone, which really introduces us for the first time to the man with scars, to the Yellow King of Carcosa. So looking forward to diving into that next week. Guys, thank you all so much for tuning in. Like, subscribe, comment below what you would like us to talk about. And John, great discussion, man.
Yeah, same here, man. It was a good discussion this week. Looking forward to wrapping, getting to the conclusion of True Detective. Good to see you. Good chat, and hope you guys have a good week.
Thanks, guys. See you later.